The Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development has vowed to explore all possible housing financial options to tackle the massive housing deficit faced in the country. Minister of Housing and Urban Development Ahmed Dangiwa made this known while briefing on the achievements, milestones and activities of the ministry within 1 year in office. Dangiwa said the ministry entered into partnership with Shelter Afrique Development to deliver 5,000 housing units as part of efforts to provide housing for Nigerians. The minister said the ministry was also exploring a partnership with the World Bank for the National Land Tilting Program. He said the ministry planned to do groundbreaking for 2,000 housing units, Renewed Hope Cities in Lagos, and 1,500 housing units, Renewed City in Kano, through public-private partnership and the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria in September.
There is a massive and historic mismatch between the housing and urban development needs of our country versus the budgetary provisions. I pointed out that from research, Nigeria's population of over 220 million population with a growth rate of 2.5% per annum requires about 550,000 housing units annually over the next 10 years to meet the housing deficit. I also noted that this will require about 5.5 trillion per annum to fix this deficit. This cannot come from the government. We are working on PPPs and other sources of housing finance to bridge the gap. It is necessary for the government to do more in terms of budgetary allocation to housing and urban development. On this basis, we made a solemn request for the budgetary allocation of a minimum of 500 billion budgetary allocation per annum for the Renewed Hope Cities and Estates program, so that we can create more impact and enable more Nigerians have access to decent shelter. I'm happy to say that this was well received by the National Assembly committees. This means that we are on course to tripling our impact in the second year, God willing. Besides increased budgetary allocation, we are intent on exploring all possible housing financing options to tackle the massive housing deficit that we face as a country. We may not have the financial war chest, but we have the leverage as a government. For far too long, we have failed to maximize our relationships with bilateral and multilateral institutions, including that we have substantial interest. We have seen where smaller African countries are taking advantage of those housing development institutions to boost housing for their citizens, while we simply watch. Within this 1 year, we have taken steps to change this. That's why I'm pleased to announce that we are set to sign a housing development partnership with Shelter Afrique Development Bank. Under the partnership, the Shelter Afrique Development Bank, the Pan-African Housing Institution, will support the Renewed Hope program with advisory services and financing of competent developers. We are looking at about 5,000 housing units in the pilot. This will be the first time that the ministry is entering into such a practical and direct partnership with a multilateral institution for the construction of homes for Nigerians. Nigeria is the second largest shareholder in SharpDB, only after Kenya with 29 million US dollars as our share subscription. Some of the key components of the Action Plan 2023 to 2027 are as follows. The first is the rapidly reforming the federal housing institutions to make them more efficient and increase their capacity. Increase the housing stock of decent and affordable housing units in the country to meet the rising demand. Thirdly, expand the implementation of the National Urban Renewal and Slum Upgrade Program to improve livability of our urban areas and slums. And streamline land administration and governance through the review of the Land Use Act in conjunction with the National Assembly and state governments. Establish the National Social Housing Fund to ensure access to decent housing for low-income earners and their privileged and the IDPs. And establish private sector-led local building materials manufacturing clusters in each of the political zones of the country to reduce imports and lower cost of housing construction.